CPU until they
Ah,
reach the
tá de putaria
capabilities of
esse
the system's
programa.
cooling solution. It's a completely different paradigm. Rather than running at constant frequency and letting power vary based on the workload, we run at essentially constant power and let the frequency vary based on the workload. We then tackled the engineering challenge of a cost-effective and high-performance cooling solution designed for that specific power level. In some ways, it becomes a simpler problem because there are no more unknowns. There's no need to guess what power consumption the worst-case game might have. As for the details of the
Esqueci que eu já
cooling
dei like
solution,
no outro.
we're saving them for our teardown. I think you'll be quite happy with what the engineering team came up with. So, how fast can we run the GPU and CPU with this strategy? The simplest approach would be to look at the actual temperature of the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails to create a consistent PlayStation 5 experience. It wouldn't do to run a console slower simply because it was in a hot room. So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, we look at the activities that the GPU and CPU are performing and set the frequencies on that basis, which makes everything deterministic and repeatable. While we're at it, we also use AMD's Smart Shift technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more pixels. The benefits of this strategy are quite large. Running a GPU at 2 gigahertz was looking like an unreachable target
Usando
with the
o
old fixed
cálculo
frequency
de
strategy. With
processamento,
this new
tudo que
paradigm,
não usa
we're
na
able to run
CPU
way
vai
over
para a
that. In
GPU.
fact, we have to cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly. 36 CUs at 2.23 gigahertz is 10.3 teraflops, and we expect the GPU to spend most of its time at or close to that frequency and performance. Similarly, running the CPU at 3 gigahertz was causing headaches with the old strategy. But now we can run it as high as 3.5 gigahertz. In fact, it spends most of its time at that frequency. That doesn't mean all games will be running at 2.23 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz. When that worst-case game arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple of percent reduction in frequency, so I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty minor. All things considered, the change to a variable frequency approach will show significant gains for PlayStation gamers. The final of our 3 principles was about finding new dreams. It's
Ele falou lá
important for us on the hardware team
10.9
to find new
teraflops,
ways to
mas ele
expand or
falou ali
deepen
que não
gaming,
era
and
o
that's
coisa
what led
total,
us
era
to
o
a focus
médio.
on 3D
Ou
audio.
seja, ele aguenta mais.
As
Isso daí eles
players, we
fizeram de
experience the
propósito
game
para ele
through the
manter
visuals,
esses
through
10
audio, and through
teraflops,
the feedback we
mas
receive
tem
from
o
the
da
controller,
CPU
such as
também, então o
rumble or
total é
hum.
mais.
Personally, I feel a
Não
game
entendi
is
direito
just
por que
dead
que ele
without
mostrou
audio.
menos.
Visuals are, of course, important, but the impact of audio is huge as well. At the same time, the audio team on a game project has to do a lot with a little. For example, on PlayStation 4, there's fierce competition for the Jaguar CPU cores. Audio typically ends up getting just a fraction of a core. That's not much of a computational resource, particularly when you consider that the visuals run at 30 or 60 frames a second, but audio processing needs to happen at almost 200 times a second. So, it's been tough going making forward progress on audio with PlayStation 4, particularly when PlayStation 3 was such a beast when it came to audio. The SPUs in Cell were almost a perfect device for audio rendering. Simple pipelined algorithms could really take advantage of asynchronous DMA and frequently reached 100% utilization of the floating point unit. There's unfortunately nothing comparable on PlayStation 4. Probably the most dramatic progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with virtual reality. The PSVR hardware has its own audio unit. It supports about 50 pretty decent 3D sound sources. And this provided a hint as to where we could go with audio, as well as some valuable experience. Not to oversimplify, but here were our goals for audio on PlayStation 5. The first goal was great audio for everyone, not just VR users or soundbar owners or headphone users. That meant audio had to be part of the console. It couldn't be a peripheral. The second goal was to support hundreds of sound sources. We didn't want developers to have to pick and choose what sounds would get 3D effects and which wouldn't. We wanted every sound in the game to have dimensionality. And finally, we wanted to really take on the challenges of presence and locality. Now, when we say presence, we mean the feeling that you're actually there. You've entered the matrix. It's not, of course, something we thought we could perfectly achieve, but the idea was that if we stopped using just a rain sound and instead used lots of 3D audio sources for raindrops hitting the ground at all sorts of locations around you, then at some point your brain would take a leap and you'd begin to have this feeling of real presence inside the virtual world of the game. This has the capacity to affect your appreciation of the game, just like music in a game does. The concept of locality is simpler. It's just your sense of where the audio is coming from, to the right of you, behind you, above you. This can immerse you further in the game, and it can also directly enhance the gameplay. To use Dead Space as an example, I know, old school, you're fighting enemies in fairly dark, spooky locations. Back in the day, if you played the game using the TV speakers, you could tell that there was one last enemy growling and hunting you down, but it was difficult to tell quite where that enemy was. With headphones, you could tell that the enemy was somewhere on the right, which let you deduce, if you couldn't see it, that it must be somewhere behind and to your right. But with 3D audio with good locality, the idea is you know the enemy is precisely there, and you turn and you take it out. So, how do we know where a sound
Ele
is
tá
coming
falando
from in the
do
first
sistema
place?
de 36
Well,
camadas
all
de
those
som,
bumps
tá?
and folds in
Ele
the
tem
ear have a meaning,
360 graus de
evolutionarily
som
speaking. Based on
e
what
para cada
direction the sound
direção
is
ele
coming
consegue
from, sound waves
direcionar
bounce around
apenas com
inside
o
the
áudio
ear,
você
there's
para
some
aquela
constructive
direção.
and destructive
Hoje em dia
interference,
no
and the
PS4 a
result
gente
is a
tem 8
change in volume.
camadas, né? Que
The
são
phase of the sound also
os norte,
shifts,
sul, leste,
depending on what
oeste
path the
e
sound
os
wave
seus
took to reach the ear
intercessores.
canal. These
É sistema
volume
muito,
changes and
muito útil e
phase
tudo
shifts are
mais. Eu
different for each
particularmente
direction
só vi
and
no
also
cinema,
vary
né?
depending
Se
on
eu
the
não me engano foi
frequency
nem
of the sound.
336, foi
Head size
28.
and head shape also
Não sei se é
impact
tão
the
útil
sound
assim.
in a similar fashion.
Bem,
The
vai
way
ser
that
útil
the
pra mim
sound
que joga jogo
changes
de
based
FPS.
on direction and frequency can be encoded in a table called the head-related transfer function, or HRTF. Here's part of one. The vertical axis is the frequency. The horizontal axis is the direction, front, back, left, right, and the color gives the degree of attenuation of the sound at that frequency. The HRTF is as unique to an individual as a fingerprint is. In fact, you're looking at mine right
Ele
now.
consegue
Here's how we measure an
mudar a
HRTF.
frequência.
We've taken hundreds of people through this process. We put a microphone in the subject's left and right ear canals, and then
Nossa.
sit the subject down in the middle of an array of 22 speakers. We then play an audio sweep from each speaker as we rotate the subject. In the course of 10 or 20 minutes, we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000 locations.
Olha
Using an
como é que eles
HRTF
desenvolveram
for
o sistema
rendering
de som
audio
do
creates
negócio.
unparalleled quality, but it's computationally expensive. The simplest way to use an HRTF is to process a sound source to make it appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 locations we sample. Unfortunately, the processing has to be done in frequency domain rather than time domain, so there's multiple fast Fourier transforms needed for every sound source for every audio tick. That's a lot of multiplies. This computational complexity was the determining factor for our strategy. It meant we had to bite the bullet and design and build a custom hardware unit for 3D audio. Collectively, we're referring to the hardware unit and the proprietary algorithms we run on it as Tempest 3D Audio Tech. The meaning of 3D audio and technology should be pretty obvious here. As for Tempest, I feel it really reflects our goals with audio. It suggests a certain intensity of experience and also hints at your presence within it. We're calling the hardware unit that we built the Tempest engine. It's based on AMD's GPU technology. We modified a compute unit in such a way as to make it very close to the SPUs in PlayStation 3. Remember when I said that they were ideal for audio? So the Tempest engine has no caches, just like an SPU. All data access is via DMA, just like an SPU. Our target was that it would have more power than a CPU, thanks to the
vieram me
parallelism that
falar
a
aqui
GPU can achieve,
que
and that it would be
por
more
que
efficient than our
o,
GPU thanks to the
o Xbox
SPU-like
é 12
architecture. The
teraflops
goal
e esse é
being to make possible
10.3
near
teraflops.
100% utilization of the
É o
CU's
seguinte,
vector units.
a GPU ela vai
Where we ended
processar
up is
muita
a unit
coisa,
with roughly the
inclusive
same
sistema de
single
áudio,
power and
ray
bandwidth as
tracing,
all
tudo,
8 Jaguar
tudo ela vai
cores in the
processar.
PlayStation 4 combined.
Esse
If we were to
10.3
use the
é
same
onde eles
algorithms
querem
as
deixar
PSVR,
fixo,
that's
ou
enough for
seja, não
something
vai
like
oscilar.
5,000 sound sources.
É,
But of course,
eu
we want
duvido
to
que o
use more
Xbox
complex
consiga
algorithms,
manter
and we
12
don't
o
need
tempo inteiro.
anything like
E eles
that
querem
number
manter
of sounds.
10.3. E eu acho que
It would
dava
have
até
been
para chegar a
wonderful
14,
if a simpler
né? Mas eu acho
strategy,
que o
such as
risco de
using
superaquecimento é
Dolby
muito
Atmos
grande,
peripherals, could have achieved our
diferente da
goals, but
empresa.
we wanted 3D audio for all,
E
not
eu
just
acho que
those
eles
with
tiveram que
licensed
escolher, a
soundbars or the
Sony
like.
foi para
Also,
mais
we wanted many
tecnologia
hundreds
e
of sound
menos
sources, not just
potência.
the 32 that
Não
Atmos
que não seja
supports. And
potente
finally, we wanted to be
10.3,
able to
mas
throw an
é por isso
overwhelming amount
que
of
era
processing power
10.3.
at the problem, and it wasn't clear what any peripheral might have inside of it. In fact, with the Tempest engine, we've even got enough power that we can allocate some to the games, to the extent that games want to make use of convolution reverb and other algorithms that are either computationally expensive or need high bandwidth. But the primary purpose of the Tempest engine remains 3D audio. Now, 3D audio is a major academic research topic. It's safe to say that no one in the world has all of the answers. And the set of algorithms that has to be invented, tuned, or implemented to realize our vision for 3D audio is immense. For example, use of HRTFs in games is quite complex. Before, I talked about making a sound source appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 HRTF sample locations. But for high-quality 3D game audio, we have to handle other possibilities. The sound source might not be at one of the 1,000 HRTF sample locations, so we have to blend the HRTF data from the closest locations that we have sampled. The sound source might be moving, which needs very special handling as that blend keeps changing, and that can cause phase artifacts in the resulting audio. Or the sound source might have a size to it, meaning it should feel as if it's coming from an area rather than a single point. There's also whole categories of approaches to be handled. 3D audio can be implemented using individual processing of 3D sound sources. But alternatively, ambisonics can be used for 3D audio. Ambisonics being somewhat like the spherical harmonics used in computer graphics. And finally, there's audio devices. The player might be using headphones or TV speakers or have a higher-end surround sound setup with 6 or more speakers, all of which need different approaches. That's a lot of variations. It's nice to have the computational resources of the Tempest engine, but it's clear that achieving our ultimate goals with 3D audio is going to be a multi-year, step-by-step process.
Ou seja,
Having
eles
said
querem
that,
fazer o
headphone
negócio
audio
funcionar
implementation
com
is
qualquer
largely complete
aparelho
at
que
this
você
time.
use.
It was a natural place for us to start. With headphones, we control exactly what each ear hears, and therefore the algorithmic development and implementation are more straightforward. For TV speakers and stereo speakers, we're in the process of implementing virtual surround sound. The idea being that if you're sitting in a sweet spot in front of the TV, then the sound can be made to feel as if it's coming from any direction, even behind you. Virtual surround sound has a lot in common with 3D audio on headphones, but it's more complex because the left ear can hear the right speaker and vice versa. We have a basic implementation of virtual surround sound up and running. We're now looking at increasing the size of that sweet spot, which is to say, making the area you need to be in to feel the 3D effect larger, and we're also working to boost the sense of locality. Headphone audio is the current gold standard for 3D audio on PlayStation 5, but we're going to see what we can do to bring virtual surround sound to a similar level, after which we'll start in on setups with more speakers, such as 6-channel surround sound. It's now to the point where some of the PlayStation 5 games in development are extensively using these systems. One of the game demos allows you to toggle between conventional PlayStation 4 style stereo audio and our new 3D audio. I listened with just an ordinary pair of over-the-ear headphones, and wow, I could feel a difference. 3D audio has that dimensional feel to it. Conventional stereo audio feels smashed flat by comparison. The improvement is obvious. So, a big advancement, but have I entered the matrix? Does my brain believe I'm really there, like I was talking about earlier when I explained our target of presence? Well, the answer is no. But you've probably caught on to what's missing here, namely whose HRTF was being used. It wasn't mine, it was the default HRTF. The audio team analyzed the hundreds that they measured and chose the one they felt was the closest fit to the total game playing audience. This shows a piece of the default HRTF on the left and my HRTF on the right. You can see that the general features are much the same, but the details are quite different. With the default HRTF, as I said, the 3D audio sounds pretty great. When I use my HRTF, though, the audio reaches a higher level of realism, which is to say that when